Drones attacked St. Petersburg during the Economic Forum. The largest oil terminals are BAMEs. A dim-witted Russian conscript filmed the site of the strike and gave away the location of his combat position. After the attack, the corvette Boykiy, from which Ukraine had been shelled, sank in St. Petersburg. Road of the Dead, chilling footage from the overland route to Crimea. The Air Force has imposed a logistical lockdown and is preparing to open the Crimean front. Up to 1.5 million people to be forcibly conscripted, mobilization in Russia is set to begin this autumn. To cause more casualties, Russia shelled Dnipro with cluster munitions. The main embarrassment of the Economic Forum, Russia unveiled a new Volga, which it copied down to the smallest detail from a Chinese car. Crime, bans and abortions, Russia has taken a radical approach to boosting the birth rate. How very traditional. They want to imprison Ksenia Sobchak for promoting LGBT issues. Russian schoolchildren are being sent en masse to military camps for the summer, where they are taught to operate drones and fire assault rifles. The Kremlin is preparing urgent measures. Z propagandists have started a mass revolt over failures at the front. Putin is officially threatening Armenia with war. A Russian soldier accused of killing civilians in Bucha is running for the State Duma with United Russia. Budanov's urgent statement about the end of the war surprised everyone. My name's Ekaterina Nestorenko, and right now, here are the main stories. But first, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. How such news lifts the spirits. This is no longer just a slap in the face for Putin. This, I'll tell you, is a great shame for the whole of Russia, made by the defence forces of Ukraine. So in the swamps of St. Petersburg, where Putin is expected to arrive for the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which has been insanely hyped by Russian propaganda, guests have started to arrive bearing gifts. Among the uninvited guests is Robert Magyar Brovdy and his exclusive fire show.
How did that happen, man? Did you see how it started?
It just started.
Drones literally tore apart the St. Petersburg oil terminal, which is located 1,100 kilometres from the Ukrainian border. It is the largest oil transshipment complex in northwest Russia. What a sight! You just can't get enough of it.
Frozen like in Sochi.
But there's another wonderful fact in this story. When our drones were already giving St. Petersburg a proper greeting, a cheerful Russian security guard started filming everything on video instead of trying to shoot down the drones. Well, at least he could have tried.
He got the shot.
It really is a cracking shot, especially for adjusting the strike. Besides the actual impact site, this idiot also gave away the location of the Russian air defence lads.
Yeah. Oh, blimey, it's still burning. Filmed it.
Filming in this. Did you get it? Film me and this.
But I got the circle.
Oh, Vanya, well done. But what's there to be surprised about? Russian soldiers have never exactly been known for their brains. Donetska, Petechka, or whatever your name is? Knowing our defence forces, this might be your last video ever. But cheers to that.
Friends, have a look at what's going on here. Heleninsky district, 6 in the morning. Here I am, looking at this from the balcony of my flat. This is what's happening here.
And I really like the comment from this swamp dweller as well.
Everything's just on fire over there. 1, 2, 3. It's just brutal. Bloody hell!
The mouse presumably meant the Kremlin one. Don't think that the forces of unmanned systems were limited to just Petersburg. Targets at the Russian Navy base in Kronstadt have been hit. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have already confirmed that they struck the Russian corvette Boykiy, which is an Arctic carrier. There's even a video now of this spectacular slap in the face to Russian air defences, right under the noses of the entire Russian leadership. An enterprise in the Tambov region involved in the production of Russian weaponry was also hit. The guests at that forum in Petersburg don't seem particularly cheerful, do they? What's the matter? Surely you didn't dislike the surprise. If I were you, I'd be legging it out of Petersburg because there might just be an encore for the fire show. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are grateful for your support and proud to have such sensible viewers. Let us know in the comments below which country you're watching from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and in the meantime, we'll carry on. Now, on to the most interesting part. Here's yet another piece of evidence that Russia is a terrorist state. During a recent attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, Russia used cluster munitions. They wanted to kill as many people as possible.
Almost all of you have seen the photos of the horror these creatures have once again caused in Dnipro. But it's my job as mayor to pay attention to the details. Just look down at your feet. The whole tarmac is battered. That's a cluster munition. They deliberately used cluster bombs to cause more casualties among civilians, the police, rescue workers and public services.
We're talking about the attack on the night of the 2nd of June when the Russian Federation struck a residential building. As a result of the Russian strike, 16 people were killed, including 2 children. Putin's St. Petersburg forum fell apart on the very first day. And it's not just about the Ukrainian armed forces' attack on St. Petersburg. Russia was so eager to show off its import substitution and supposedly unrivaled innovations that it didn't even bother to make its so-called know-how look visually unique. Just have a look at this car. It's not a Volga. In reality, it's a Chinese Geely Monjaro. The Kremlin spent 60 billion rubles on localizing its production. Essentially, they only changed the badge. The price of the car is 4.2 million rubles. That's almost 3 times more expensive than the original. And such strikes, apart from being impressive and warming the hearts of Ukrainians, also have a very powerful effect. After a series of such attacks, they first introduced restrictions and issued fuel only with coupons in occupied Crimea.
And now the situation with petrol is such that it's simply impossible to buy any at all. That is, you can only get it with coupons. And the coupons are given out by an organisation so that people can get to work. Local residents are now walking everywhere because there's absolutely no petrol.
And now just imagine in the so-called LNR and in St. Petersburg as well, and even take a seat in Moscow itself. Yeah, that's our defence forces in action. And yet this is Russia, a mighty oil power. Do you appreciate the irony? So then, in the occupied Luhansk region, the local authorities have set a limit, no more than 20 litres of petrol or diesel per day per person. In St. Petersburg, some petrol stations have already limited fuel sales to 50 litres per customer due to disruptions in the supply of A95 petrol. Similar restrictions have come into effect in Moscow and the Moscow region as well. At certain petrol station chains, no more than 60 litres of petrol or 100 litres of diesel are dispensed per refuelling. But the funniest thing is that some Russians don't understand where the petrol shortage at filling stations in the country has come from.
I have a question for the experts, those who keep up with the news. Yekaterinburg, what's going on? I'm already stopping at my 3rd petrol station. There's no 95 petrol at Gazprom. What's more, now I've just pulled into one on Viz. I think only one pump is working with 95. All right, the queue is nothing, but you can only pay in cash, and I haven't got any cash on me. Well, I hope I can just about make it to some petrol station that's got 95. That's it then, we're entering an era of shortages. Or are we?
It's now the 5th year of this so-called special operation, and all's going to plan.
It's all happening strictly on schedule, according to plan.
The Ukrainian armed forces have imposed a real logistical lockdown on the Russians. Here are some shots from the R280 motorway, or the so-called land route to Crimea. The defence forces are hitting the enemy's logistics so effectively that Russians travelling this route to Crimea are resorting to their favourite cover tactics to save themselves from attack. The occupiers are disguising military vehicles as civilian ones. Ukrainian troops are actively attacking the occupiers right on the front line. Fighters from the Perun unit of the 42nd Brigade destroyed an enemy BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher in the Novopavlivka direction when it moved into position. And here are shots of a Russian loaf van carrying fuel detonating after being hit by an SPV drone on the eastern front. And this is now the North Slobozhansky direction. Border guards from the destruction team unit of the 5th Detachment destroyed communication and UAV control antennas, eliminated loitering drones, struck enemy infantry and disabled enemy vehicles. The main result is a destroyed 2S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzer. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a massive horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. If you're unable to do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they're watching us. Mobilization's coming. The Kremlin is planning a large-scale reinforcement of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Whether the authorities will announce mobilization, as they did in 2022, or continue with a covert campaign is not yet clear. But Putin expects the mobilization to bring in at least 1.5 million people. That's according to information from the Kremlin's inner circle. Perhaps if mobilization's announced in the autumn.
There is currently a lot of discussion about statements that mobilization will begin in Russia this autumn. Some say it's fake. I'll tell you that, mobilization is most likely being prepared specifically for the autumn.
There's an idea in the Kremlin to start mobilization as early as the summer. This is being pushed by the chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, but he doesn't have any support, although everything could change. In order to give birth, the Kremlin is so obsessed with increasing the birth rate that they are considering an official ban on divorce and contraception.
According to our source in the Kremlin, the situation with the birth rate in Russia remains extremely difficult. That's why we can expect a tough and decisive fight to solve the demographic problems. These are restrictions and later a complete ban on the sale of condoms and other contraceptives. A ban, or at the very least, a serious complication of the divorce process.
Let me remind you, there is still discussion in Russia about the possibility of introducing a childlessness tax. And all this because Putin wants there to be loads of Russians, so he has people to send to be slaughtered in war.
But we must do everything that depends on us, so that in the future we can achieve a steady increase in the birth rate in our country.
And let's not forget about the widespread restrictions on abortions in Russia, the constant propaganda of the joys of having many children, and the reduction of a woman's role to nothing but childbearing. Let me remind you, even children in life safety lessons are told that a woman is like a mycelium.
The inner strength of Russian women lies, just like the strength of all other women, in their capacity for motherhood. And by virtue of her biological makeup, she, like a mycelium, spreads life around her, and nature has given her this inner strength.
And adult women are advised to start having children before the age of 24.
If one can put it that way, of course, it's from 18 to 24.
The worse things go at the front, the more insistently the state intrudes into Russians' bedrooms. And against the backdrop of the campaign for higher birth rates in the Russian Federation, orthodox values are being reinforced, and there is an almost complete demonization of non-traditional orientations. It has reached the point where people in Russia are being reported simply for discussing or even mentioning LGBT issues. Just the other day, Ksenia Sobchak released an interview with the blogger Igor Sinyak. Among other things, they talked about non-traditional orientation.
This fat bloke still can't manage to buy himself those bags.
So in response to this interview, the head of Safe Internet, Katerina Mazula, filed a report against Sobchak for LGBT propaganda.
misogynist or LGBT extremist movement propaganda in the interview. And what's more, this devilry was deliberately published on Children's Day. It's a mockery of all the state's efforts to protect children.
What?
Wrote the head of the Safe Internet League on her Telegram channel.
And to give you an idea of the scale of the anti-LGBT campaign, the day before, homosexuality and transgenderism were labelled as mental illnesses in the Russian Federation.
It is not prohibited to carry out mandatory differential diagnosis of transsexualism with 5 mental illnesses, which are listed here, and primarily with schizotypal disorder, slowly progressive schizophrenia, sluggish schizophrenia, and prolonged pubertal crisis as an episode of adolescent schizophrenia. The differentiation should not be made with transgender identity, nor with depression and anxiety arising from the stress of rejection or the patient's discreditation, but with mental disorders.
In general, if you believe Russian officials, the main threat to the country is not war, not poverty and not corruption, but interviews on YouTube. At this rate, the Russian Federation will soon officially declare the rainbow an extremist symbol. After Armenia began actively moving closer to the European Union and the United States, Russian propaganda deployed simply colossal resources to discredit Yerevan.
This is such an ungrateful move from Armenia, whom we have saved so many times, that I am lost for words. It's about time we considered protecting the Russian population and our interests in this country. If not Vladimir Vladimirovich, then his successor will definitely have to take action.
But for the Kremlin, declaring the Armenian authorities enemies of the people wasn't enough, so they decided to blackmail Yerevan with food products. The other day, the Russian Federation banned Armenia from importing vegetables, fruit, berries and fish to them. Officially, it was for safety reasons, but in reality, the Kremlin simply wanted to punish Armenia. But it didn't work. Less than a week after Russia introduced the new rules, Armenia had already set up the sale of goods to Europe.
We will be forced, not just somewhere, but in fact, to wind down almost all our work with Armenia in this case, in the economic sphere, concerning integration processes.
And there's a failure on the trade front too, but Russia is not giving up and plans to influence the elections in Armenia scheduled for this weekend. The Kremlin dreams of changing the government, which has turned away from Russian partnership and set a course for a brighter future. Earlier, Western media reported that Moscow is preparing to bring 100,000 people into Armenia so that they can vote against the current Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan.
The cost of this transportation's already been estimated at around $50 million. By mid-May, the Kremlin had set quotas for each region, how many Armenians each should send to the elections. Administrators were ordered to report on their preparations.
And these are not just theories. Correspondence has surfaced online with a pro-Kremlin blogger and head of the Armenian branch of the Eurasia Foundation, Mikhail Badalian, in which he offers to buy tickets for Armenian citizens living in Russia so that they can take part in the elections on the 7th of June. The threat of Putin using pro-Russian Armenians has unfortunately not disappeared, but Yerevan has already warned Armenians who plan to assist Russia that, upon their return as Armenian citizens, they will be sent for military training. And of course, now Putin and Lukashenko have begun openly threatening Armenia, saying that Russia could launch a new special military operation there. More details about what is currently happening in Armenia are in our report.
While Armenia is preparing for parliamentary elections scheduled for Sunday, the 7th of June, the Kremlin, represented by Putin, is preparing large-scale provocations in the country and is threatening Nikol Pashinyan with serious consequences if his people make what Moscow considers the wrong choice, namely in favour of European integration rather than closer ties with Russia.
Therefore, we will be forced, not just somewhere, but in fact to wind down almost all our work with Armenia in this case, in the sphere of the economy, concerning integration processes.
Alexander Lukashenko is also chiming in. The Belarusian dictator is practically openly threatening the Armenians. He says that if pro-European parties win a majority in the parliamentary elections and the country tries to join the EU, it'll face the same fate as Ukraine, namely the deployment of Russian troops.
Armenians need to be very careful, and the people should, God forbid, not repeat what happened in Ukraine. That's exactly how it started in Ukraine. You remember this, that they, the Armenians, who have only just come out of one war, did not end up in a difficult situation because of it. There's no need to rush. You just need to think it through. One must be wise.
However, Armenia has long since thought everything through. After the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, in which Russia effectively distanced itself from what was happening, the latter has almost lost its military and political influence in Armenia.
Probably only the lazy haven't said that these elections will determine Armenia's future geopolitical direction, which way it will move. But in terms of the intensity of passions, these are indeed probably, since the Velvet Revolution, which brought Nikol Pashinyan to power, these are perhaps the most active elections. Even the elections after 2020, in 2021, following the 44-day war, well, they weren't as vibrant and didn't attract as much attention as the current ones.
Putin himself understands this perfectly well, which is why he is trying, by all means, fair or foul, to bring Armenia back, as he likes to put it, into Russia's native harbour.
Everything that is good for Armenians is acceptable and good for Russia. Proceed in whatever way you feel is most appropriate, taking into account the best interests of the Armenian people.
At the same time, Moscow is putting economic pressure on Armenia. This is the last lever in the hands of the Russian dictator. Russia's share in Armenia's trade turnover is 36%. Moscow is simultaneously the country's main exporter and importer. Flour, grain, fertilizers, diesel fuel and petrol are supplied from Russia on preferential terms at prices several times lower than the market rate. The railways in the Republic are under concession to the Russian monopoly RZD, but perhaps the Kremlin's strongest argument is the price of gas. Both Pashinyan and Lukashenko were reminded of this.
You're talking about money. At present, Russia sells natural gas to Armenia duty-free. I might be mistaken, $150 to $160 per 1,000 cubic meters. Whereas in the European Union, natural gas costs $550 to $650 per 1,000, 6 times more expensive. And that's just natural gas. I'm not talking about anything else. What sort of benefit is that? If we're talking about money,
pro-Russian politicians in Armenia are sounding the alarm. In their view, if the country embarks on the path towards European integration, it will lead to a new war, far more bloody than all the previous ones, and not only on the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh.
The entire conflict between the West and Russia, the leadership, the current leadership of Armenia, has already shifted it onto Armenian territory.
But analysts note that the majority of Armenian society is still in favour of a pro-Western course. Friendship with Putin promises the country nothing but new sanctions, restrictions and isolation.
Of course there will be a crisis, since it is truly multifaceted, and it is based not only on economic or energy grounds, but also on the sphere of security. Since Russia can, on the one hand, provide Armenia with a security umbrella, or not provide it, as we have seen, but it can also itself become a source of threat. And we have seen this in the example of other countries.
But Nikol Pashinyan is extremely cunning. According to political analysts, he will try to sit on 2 chairs at once. On the one hand, to maintain more or less friendly relations with the Kremlin, and on the other, to use the newly elected parliament to steer the country towards Europe.
Nikol Pashinyan, the government has never spoken about its aim to leave the EAEU. They are making full use of the advantages of membership in this organisation, while at the same time trying to find some alternatives for the future. And we understand that even hypothetical EU membership would take 10 to 20 years. In other words, it's not 2 years for the promised visa-free regime. This is a lengthy period of time, during which, generally speaking, we understand that a lot could change in Russia as well.
Putin himself understands this perfectly, so unlike Lukashenko, he is extremely reserved in his criticism of Armenia. After all, it should not be forgotten that, aside from exports, Russia also imports a great deal from its neighbouring country. So, whether he likes it or not, the bunker dweller will still have to do business with Pashinyan and the new Armenian parliament.
The Russian and Armenian peoples are bound by ties of friendship, without any exaggeration, and by special relations that have lasted for centuries.
Patriotic education of children in Russia is reaching a new level. Now, along with brainwashing, children are being taught how to operate drones.
Upbringing's multifaceted. As you rightly said, when it comes to culture, it is ongoing and takes place at all levels.
A summer health campaign for school children has started in Belgorod. According to officials, children can look forward to sport, creativity, tourism and other useful activities. But there's a catch. In the footage that's been released, school children are being told about weapons, military gear, taught to shoot in a special simulator, and how to operate drones. Yes, who needs art clubs or walks in the woods anymore? In Russia, childhood is increasingly starting to resemble basic military training. Russian propagandists continue to sum up the interim results of demilitarization. The host of Solovyov Live, Mikhail Zvenchak, reported with concern that Ukrainian drones are now reaching as far as Yamal, and the number of attacks is only increasing.
Ukrainian forces have inflicted fire damage and attempted strikes on targets across the whole of Russia. Over the past month, more than 7,000 drones have been recorded on the territory, on the distant territories of Russia. It is important to bear in mind that these are not only the drones striking the territory of Donbass. No, unfortunately, those used in the Special Military Operations Zone, the same FPV drones, are not included in the statistics. So, in fact, we are only talking about long-range drones, which have already reached as far as the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, and in general, the entire Ural Federal District. Month by month, the attempts by the Ukrainian armed forces to strike deep into our territory will only increase, and it is not for us to say that this is not a threat.
Bravo! Vladimir Vladimirovich! For 4 years, we've been told about security and border protection, yet in the end, drones are flying across half the country. Suddenly, the truth has started to be told about the Ukrainian army as well. Here, for example, is a case in point. The propagandist and Radio Russia presenter Kirill Fedorov admitted that no one can compare with the armed forces of Ukraine except perhaps China and the USA.
Can Belarus, at this moment, can the Belarusian army stand up to the Ukrainian army? I don't think so. I think that if we're talking about non-nuclear confrontations, then of the two armies, well, except perhaps the army of the United States of America, China, let's put them aside, maybe India as well, simply because of its sheer size. No army in the world would be able to stand up to the Ukrainian army.
Notice, not a word about Russia's so-called second army in the world. Now that's a transformation. In 2022, propagandists denied the very existence of Ukraine as a country, and now they're calling the Ukrainian army one of the strongest in the world. Just imagine Hungary, which for years opposed Ukraine joining the EU, now won't be blocking it. But it's too soon to celebrate, because if it's not one thing, it's another. Now in Poland, there are calls to block Kiev's Euro integration. It feels as if they've simply swapped places. In Poland, the Deputy Speaker of the Sejm and leader of the Confederation Party, Krzysztof Bosak, has called for blocking Ukraine's accession to the EU until Kiev resolves historical disputes related to the Volhynia tragedy. He also advocated for stopping Starlink funding for Ukraine and criticised Polish assistance to Kiev. These statements came after President Volodymyr Zelensky awarded one of the Ukrainian armed forces units an honorary title in honour of a UPA hero. This move drew criticism from Polish politicians. At the same time, official Kiev emphasised that historical disputes between Ukrainians and Poles primarily benefit Russia. And I very much want to add, in capital letters, when the Poles send their unit to Ukraine to defend our security and their own, they can call it whatever they like. At the same time, Hungary, which for a long time was regarded as the main critic of Ukraine's European integration, has unexpectedly shown a willingness not to block the start of accession talks with the EU. According to Politico, this could allow Kiev to move on to the next stage of the negotiation process in the near future. German Chancellor Friedrich Merkel stated that the issue of supporting Ukraine and its European integration should not depend on bilateral disputes between individual countries. According to him, Europe must maintain unity in the face of the Russian threat, and the opening of accession talks with Ukraine will be an important signal for the entire continent. Something like that. I do apologise, as they say, but in the 5th year of the war, including fighting for Poland's freedom, such statements from the Poles are really starting to get on my nerves. What do you make of such statements from our neighbours? The International Fencing Federation has decided to completely lift restrictions on Russian and Belarusian athletes. Starting from the World Championships in Hong Kong, which will take place in July, they will be able to compete under their national flags, wearing their national team kits and with their national anthems played. Thus, fencing has become yet another sport in which Russian athletes have effectively been reinstated to international competitions with full status. Previously, similar decisions had already been made by the international federations of judo, wrestling, taekwondo, aquatic sports and artistic gymnastics. The International Fencing Federation explained its decision by referring to the principles of the Olympic Charter, in particular the equal treatment of athletes. What a corrupt world international sport is, at least in part, and how easily Russian banknotes can blind people, even as people are dying in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities from targeted Russian strikes on residential buildings. But if possible, such decisions are dictated not even by Russian rubles. It's all difficult to describe in polite language. Murderers as deputies, the Kremlin continues its victory-obsessed personnel policy and is bringing its chosen heroes of the so-called special military operation into power. One such soldier, accused of shooting civilians in Bucha, will stand for election to the State Duma from United Russia. More on the Kremlin's policy and the employment of war criminals coming up.
This is Nursultan Musayev. At the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he commanded a reconnaissance platoon of the 104th Air Assault Regiment of the 76th Airborne Division, which operated in the Bucha district. He is responsible for the torture and murder of at least one civilian in Bucha.
The commander of the Russian reconnaissance platoon ordered his subordinates to abduct a 29-year-old local resident who was driving through an enemy checkpoint.
The victim was taken to a forest near the village of Dnipro, where he was brutally tortured for a long time, and then, on Musagaliev's orders, was shot and his body left at the scene of the murder.
For Ukraine, Musayev is a war criminal. In Russia, however, he is a hero, and a decorated one at that. He also has 3 Orders of Courage and a medal for services to the fatherland. But the honour bestowed upon this hero was not limited to awards alone. After demobilization, he became a participant in the Time of Heroes program created on Putin's orders. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in the soldier's career. He is now a politician.
It should be understood that this is purely a sort of facade, because these veterans will not play any real role. It's purely PR, so that just as some odd old man sits next to Putin, similarly, a handful of rather peculiar heroes of the special military operation must also be present in various places in the State Duma. There are a few of them, deputy governors and the like.
In 2025, Musayev became the acting Deputy Minister of Information Policy for the Orenburg region and then went on to head an entire district. But his career hasn't stood still, and now Musayev is a candidate for the State Duma from Putin's United Russia Party. But in this particular case, the lackluster PR has another aim: to drown out the trail of the Bucha butcher with a veneer of political virtue.
Of Bucha, this is generally a very painful topic for the Kremlin. And if we look at how many criminal cases have been brought for publications regarding the events in Bucha, we only become convinced that this is truly very painful. And that is precisely why a war criminal who participated in this crime could very well end up in the State Duma.
Cases of military personnel who operated in the Kyiv region in February to March 2022 being drawn into politics are not isolated incidents. Colonel Sergei Karasev also entered politics. At the time of the invasion, he was the commander of the 31st Air Assault Brigade of the Russian Airborne Forces. In Ukraine, he is considered a war criminal.
25th March 2022, the commander, together with Russian servicemen, went round the flats. In one of the flats, the occupiers found a local resident. Due to the man not having any identification documents, the commander led him backwards to the children's playground and shot him in the head with an automatic weapon.
In January 2026, Karasev becomes deputy mayor of Samara. This is by no means the first time someone has been given an official post. This is happening as part of the aforementioned Putin program, Time of Heroes.
Time of Heroes sounds a bit grandiose, but on the other hand, it does actually reflect the situation today. There really are quite a lot of genuine heroes of the Russian Federation here.
And let's not forget, Putin sees talent in the military.
Well, we need to support them. We need to look for talented people. There are plenty of talented individuals there. I'll meet them, believe me.
Talented, modern, sharp-minded people. We need to seek them out. Seek, find and support them.
Among such talents is Major General Alexander Shuvaev, who took part in the war against Ukraine. He rose from the ranks to become the head of an entire region, replacing Vyacheslav Gladkov as the governor of Belgorod Oblast. But let's get back to the Duma elections. According to calculations, 478 participants in the war registered for United Russia's primaries, and 43 of them won. According to the party's internal rules, the status of being a participant in the so-called special military operation automatically adds 25% to a candidate's votes. This is how the Kremlin wants to refresh the Duma and promote itself.
Putin is deciding, or perhaps it's Kirienko, the internal policy department, is seriously deciding to renew the composition of the deputies. There's a lot written about this. And in fact, as part of this renewal, yes, for appearance's sake, a certain number of participants in the special military operation are being included. Again, it's not as if there's a mass invasion of war criminals into the Duma. No, it's an isolated case, which will simply be highlighted as much as possible through the mass media.
But only those who have been thoroughly vetted and are at least minimally trusted and can be controlled are promoted into politics.
At the moment, no one feels safe at all.
In reality, most of the military are feared in the Kremlin and are appeased by other means. And those few dozen officials in uniform are just there for show. And
these new veterans pose a huge danger and a significant threat to the regime, and they are trying to appease them somehow, including with all sorts of schemes like university admissions without competition. So of course, it's all absolute nonsense. It's all just Putin's PR gimmicks. But when it comes to brainwashing people, they do the job quite well.
So there is no mass transfer of power to the frontline veterans. The Kremlin is simply putting a few convenient figures on display, with no intention of sharing real power.
Urgent. Kyrylo Budanov states, the president has instructed us to try to end the war as soon as possible, preferably before winter. What does the Kremlin think about this, and how realistic are such deadlines? We'll tell you about it now.
Could the war end as early as this autumn? Kyrylo Budanov has made a statement about negotiations, Belarus's role, and the chances of ending the hostilities. But are the sides really moving closer to peace, or is it still a long way off?
We are ready to hold bilateral talks with Russia. I am ready to meet with Putin if he's willing.
The issue of ending the war is coming to the forefront. The president of Ukraine has given a clear directive to end the war by November.
This is the president's instruction to try to end this war as soon as possible. And I can confirm that it is indeed his intention to end the hostilities as quickly as possible, preferably before winter. As the head of the president's office, I will certainly do everything to achieve the goals set by the president of Ukraine. On my view, it is absolutely correct, timely and well thought out.
Budanov considers this idea to be quite realistic. But is it really so?
Accordingly, if there are no military successes, and against this backdrop the economy is genuinely stalling and social upheavals are possible in the country, then these are the very preconditions that allow the Ukrainian side to talk about a possible end to the war.
But negotiations with Russia also remain important. After all, the US had previously announced their suspension.
The trilateral negotiations between the US, Russia and Ukraine are currently suspended. This was stated by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. According to him, such negotiations are not taking place at the moment. However, Washington hopes that the situation may change.
But according to Budanov, this process has not stopped, and there is still some progress being made. Moreover, the American delegation's planning to visit Kyiv and Moscow in the near future.
I have never stood in a dead end, and I will continue to hold this view, because some processes are ongoing, you are right, they are, shall we say, not entirely public.
Ukraine's position regarding its territory remains unchanged, but is Russia actually prepared to make concessions? After all, despite talk of a ceasefire, Moscow seems to have set its sights on a new theatre of war, Armenia. This is
absolutely nothing new. These, shall we say, similar signals began 2 years ago. In my personal view, yes, it is absolutely realistic, because the geography allows for it. That is, there is a shared border. Well, there's no point comparing the strength of Armenia and the Russian Federation. Everyone understands that.
At the same time, the role of Belarus is once again being discussed. The country remains an ally of Russia and provides its territory for joint military exercises and the deployment of Russian forces.
I hope that we'll be able to take the right steps to ensure the security, to secure the very idea of the repeated use and utilization of the territory of the Republic of Belarus for armed aggression against Ukraine.
That is precisely why the Ukrainian side regards the Belarusian direction as potentially sensitive from a security perspective, especially in the context of possible escalation scenarios.
By escalating tensions on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, the Russian Federation is attempting to solve both military and political objectives for itself.
Political objectives? Militarily, this involves drawing in the operational reserves of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Politically, it is about maintaining its sphere of influence in the post-Soviet space, particularly on the territory of the Republic of Belarus.
And it is no coincidence that a specific time frame is being mentioned. There is an attempt to end the war specifically before November.
The point is that on the 3rd of November, the United States will hold its midterm congressional elections. Accordingly, before this date, the American side will be making every possible military, political and economic effort to put pressure on Ukraine to bring the war to an end. This is perfectly understood in the President's office as well. That's why Budanov is making such statements.
But the main question remains, will Russia want to end the war in Ukraine and change its rhetoric towards European countries?
He is deeply interested in seeing the war continue. But on the other hand, I must emphasize once again, there are a number of objective factors. These include the state of the Russian economy and the enormous pressure from Ukraine and the United States. Regardless of Putin's desire to continue the war, the Russian Federation has virtually no means left.
The question of ending the war remains unresolved. Ukraine has declared its readiness for a ceasefire and negotiations, but the key uncertainty remains. Is Russia itself ready for this, and does it even want it at all?
Much respect to this lad from Lviv. The story is at once very touching and kind, but it is also upsetting because of the attitude towards people with disabilities. In these shots, Cecilia's dancing the graduation waltz with a classmate at the last bell ceremony. The girl's mother wrote on social media that the parents of other graduates were against Sofia taking part in the event, but one of her classmates offered to be a partner for the dance. However, later on, journalists from Channel 24 looked into the story in more detail. Sofia Radosh has spinal muscular atrophy and studied according to an individual program. The girl's mother stated that during preparations for the graduation, some of the parents involved in organising the event spoke out against Sofia's participation in the celebration because of her physical condition and the fact that she uses a wheelchair. According to the woman, this was a painful blow for the family. At the same time, the parents of the graduates explained that Sofia's participation was discussed only at the final stage of preparations when the main waltz routine had already been rehearsed. In the end, a compromise was reached to organise a separate dance for the girl and her classmate. Perhaps indeed the situation's a little exaggerated, but the question remains, why was the girl's participation in the graduation waltz only discussed at the final stages? And what do you think? Are the parents simply looking for an excuse for their unworthy behaviour, or is the scandal really being blown out of proportion? That's all for now. Give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.